The afternoon went on, and Jeff soon forgot that this was a mandatory arrangement. He actually started to find himself liking Randy. Sure, their first encounter was a little sketchy, but he was coming around to the guy, finding that he wasn't so bad once his idiot friends were removed from the equation. About an hour later, things took a new turn. Jeff heard the twin pops of two car doors shutting in near unison, and then heard the engine start up. He dropped the game controller and peered out of Randy's bedroom window, just in time to see his mother and Randy's mother backing out of the driveway. "Our parents are leaving," Jeff said. "About time. I figured my mom would eventually talk your mom into going shopping or going to get coffee or something like that." Jeff heard Randy pause the game. "Hey Jeff, come downstairs. I want to show you some cool stuff," Randy invited, and Jeff followed. Randy led Jeff out to the garage. It was hot in there with the main door shut. The garage was well kept though, and Jeff observed stacks of magazines underneath a workbench, as well as tools and various other utility items stacked about. Standing in the small, closed-in garage, with the late summer heat lingering about, Jeff began to feel a bit uneasy. Despite the fact that he and Randy had seemed to bond over the last few hours, Jeff couldn't ignore a sense that things were different now that the adults were gone. "What did you want to show me?" Jeff asked. "Hold on, let me get it," Randy replied, moving the magazines out to reveal a small red box. Jeff watched as Randy removed the box and opened it. "Check it out, my dad's flare gun," Randy announced, and waved the red, tubular gun about. "Whoa, be careful with that," Jeff shouted, more out of shock than real concern. "It's fine, dude, don't be a pussy. It's not even loaded," Randy said. However, Jeff watched as he fished one of the flares out of a back compartment. Randy then continued to fiddle with the flare gun, popping it open and loading a flare. "Now it's loaded," he announced. "My dad showed me how to use this last year when we went out boating. Sometimes I take it out back and shoot flares at the trees. But maybe this time I don't need a tree." The change in Randy's voice and demeanor was impossible to ignore. "Okay, well, cool gun. Let's get back in the house though. It's hot out here, plus I'm getting hungry. What do you have to eat?" However, as Jeff turned to walk through the small door leading back into the house, his path was suddenly blocked by two more familiar faces. "Where you going, Jeffy the fat kid?" Troy blurted out as he and Keith stepped forward into the garage. "Took you too long enough to get here. I've had to babysit this faggot all day," Randy shouted. A wicked joy was present in his words. "Sorry, Randy, but Keith here had to mow his front yard before his parents would let him come out," Troy said, a sheepish tone to his voice. "It's cool, we're here now," Keith said. "What is going on?" Jeff asked, staring at Randy. He noticed that Randy still had the flare gun in his hands. "I'll tell you what's going on, Jeff. You owe Keith and Troy an apology for what you did. You sucker punched them and then ran away. You didn't even have the balls to fight them fair, so now you're going to pay them what you owe." "I'm not going to fight you, okay? I'm done with that shit," Jeff replied, as he glanced about the room for an exit. "You're right about that. You're not going to fight. You're going to stand there and let my boys get their licks in. Then I get mine, and when that's done, you get out of my house. I'll tell my mom that you got sick and walked home, and after that, if you see us again, you better walk the other way. I'm not going to stand here and get hit by you or your friends, so just let me go home. How about that? I'll tell my mom that we're cool and everyone wins." "Okay," Jeff asked. Randy then raised the flare gun towards Jeff. "No, you stay pussy, you stay and take your licks." Jeff felt that sensation once more, that sick, rich dark matter that swirled about inside of him. He could taste it now. It was heaven. In his mind, he imagined himself diving into it, swimming in it, letting it swallow him whole. He looked around and the sensation only grew. he saw Randy, standing there holding the flare gun. It was limp in his hands, though, and the hammer was not cocked back. Jeff knew that Randy had no intention of firing it. He looked over at Keith, skinny and pathetic, a kid born to follow. Troy, fat and sweaty, breathing a bit heavy from his walkover, and of course in the middle of it all, Jeff himself. He felt that pleasure begin to mix with the rage, forming the perfect product. He tried to avoid sampling it. He knew that only regret could come from indulging in it. However, when it was placed so close, when the aroma and the promise of that sweet, savory flavor was only inches away, Jeff found that he could no more to stand against it than a ship in the ocean could stand against a typhoon. Jeff began to smile. "Why are you smiling at me, you queer for me, or something?" Randy asked, a slight nervous tinge in his voice. "Am I smiling, Randy?" "I guess it's because I'm just having so much fun," Jeff announced, and suddenly lunged towards the unprepared kid holding the flare gun. Jeff struck Randy once in the nose. Randy's arms dropped, yet he kept hold of the flare gun. Jeff, without even needing to look, realized that Troy and Keith had actually taken a step back, instead of advancing as they should have. Jeff delivered another strong blow to Randy's jaw, causing the boy to drop to the floor. Jeff now turned his attention to Troy and Keith, the two tough kids that had yet to actually make so much as a move in his direction. Troy actually backed up a step and stumbled over the stack of magazines that Randy had moved earlier. Jeff took this opportunity and stepped forward, once again introducing Troy's round belly to his fist. Troy tried to stay on his feet, but Jeff's punches, combined with the stumble over the magazines, caused Troy to fall back, landing hard and striking his head on the concrete slab that was the garage's floor. Keith was actually trying to back away. However, Jeff was currently standing between him and the only exit to the garage, since the carport door was closed. Jeff took 2 quick steps towards the skinny kid and felt the most intense joy at seeing Keith stagger backwards, knocking his back into the wall. That perfect blend of pleasure, control, and rage had come together. Jeff felt as though he was floating above the world. Somewhere in his mind, he knew there would be hell to pay for this, but at that exact moment in time, he couldn't care less. He didn't care about Lou, he didn't care about being arrested, and he didn't care if his dad got fired. All he cared about, in that fraction of time, was hurting Keith. Keith tried to make a run for it, hoping to squeeze through the small gap between Jeff and the door. However, Jeff clipped him a hard right hand to his face, causing Keith to stagger back again. Jeff could see that his knees were buckling and took full advantage. He moved in, pinning Keith to the wall, and began to deliver blow after blow to the skinny kid's stomach. Keith's eyes became as large as saucers. Once satisfied, Jeff stepped back and watched in demonic glee as Keith slowly slid down the wall, gasping for air. Randy got back to his feet, but seemed to have no idea what to do. "We done now, Randy? We good, or do you and your friends need more?" Jeff mocked. "No more, we're cool." "How about you?" Jeff asked. "It was Randy's idea," Keith said weakly. "Yeah, man, we didn't even want to," Troy agreed. The debate may have continued, but the sound of a returning car broke the tension. "Oh shit, my mom is back," Randy shouted, his voice cracking in a humorous way. It seemed that the previous tough guy had all but shrunk back to a scared child. "So we'll just say that we were all hanging out," Keith replied. "No, the flare gun. If she finds out that I messed with it, I'm screwed." "So put it back," Jeff suggested. That sensation of rage was fading again, and he felt control returning. "Yeah, grab the magazines, please," Randy begged. Jeff found that he rather liked that tone, that begging, whip dog mentality. Jeff was paying no attention to Randy. He was down on the floor, calmly gathering the magazines. He didn't really care if Randy got in trouble or not, however. If his mother returned and found trouble, He feared that Lou may not be able to return home as promised. Everything else happened in a flash, both literally and figuratively. Randy, now in a panic over the trouble he'd be in if he was caught playing with the flare gun, had begun to sweat. As his hands frantically clawed over the gun, his thumbs pushed the hammer back, unintentionally. He didn't even notice that the gun was cocked. He was turning it over in his hands, trying to quickly disarm it. He then heard the sound of keys in the front door. He knew that he had only seconds now to hide it. Everything else happened in slow motion. The gun slipped from Randy's sweaty hands as he'd attempted to rotate it once more. He saw it fall to the floor, seeming to float to the ground, rather than fall. Jeff, busy stacking the magazines, had only enough time to register Randy's shocked gasp. He turned to look in the boy's direction, just in time to see the bright red flare gun hit the floor. The gun discharged, launching a speeding ball of fire directly into Jeff's face. Jeff felt the hot flash of heat and pain tear across the left side of his face. After the initial registry of agony, there was no more thinking. Jeff began to scream, clutching the left side of his face and rolling around on the floor. For a while he forgot everything, as he was plunged into that dark, rich syrup once more, the rage almost serving to dull the pain. When he finally did come to a stable level of alertness, he realized he was in a hospital room. Half of his face was bandaged, he knew that much. He wanted to open his eyes and speak, let his family know he was awake, but the drug still had a firm hold. He was awake, but not quite yet functioning. He could hear several familiar voices, though. "Is he going to be okay?" Dr. Jeff's mother asked. "Oh yes, Ma, I am. Your son will be fine, however. He will have a lengthy road to recovery and will need your support." The flare struck his face and caused third-degree burns on his left side. "How bad is the eye?" Jeff's father asked. "Hard to say at this point. He'll need to see an optometrist for further review, but the damage appears quite severe." "And his face? What about his face?" Jeff's mother asked, sounding deeply concerned. "Well, we were able to clean and treat the injury in time, so you've no concern for infection or anything of that matter. We'll want him on antibiotics for a while, and he'll need to have the wound cleaned and dressed on a regular basis, but all in all, your son got very lucky. The damage could have been more severe." "Doctor," his mother began again, "what if there is permanent damage? What do we do about that?" "As I said, an optometrist will have to examine the eye." Sheila Woods interrupted the doctor, sounding more agitated than before. "You're not listening, not the eye, his face. What do we do to correct his face?" she demanded. "Well, Ma, we have treated his face. Like I said, there shouldn't be a risk of infection so long as you—" She cut him off again. "Not the infection, his appearance. What can we do for that?" "Miss Woods, that's hardly a concern at this point. Once he is healed and back on his feet, you can possibly explore plastic surgery to repair some of the damage, but honestly, right now, we can't waste concern on how he looks. What is important is that your son is healthy. He can expect to be back home in a few days, maybe sooner." Jeff's dad spoke again. "Okay, thank you, doctor. Can we have some time alone, please? My wife and I need to speak." "Certainly," the doctor replied. "Lou, why don't you go down to the hospital cafeteria and get yourself a snack?" Matt Woods suggested. "But I want to be here in case Jeff wakes up," Lou replied. "Lou, they told us that Jeff is heavily medicated. They don't expect him to wake up any time tonight. So just go, and if he does come around, we'll have you paged," Matt replied. Jeff heard the door open and close as Lou exited. His parents both let out a long, shaky sigh, but Jeff was starting to believe it was not a sigh of relief, but rather one of stress. "We're going to have to homeschool him now, Matt. That's just what it's going to be. We're going to have to keep him home," he heard his mother rant, her voice sounding frantic. "What?" "I mean, he probably won't be able to start school right on time, but I doubt he'll miss a whole year," his father responded, trying to maintain a calmer voice. "I'm not talking about that, Matt. I'm not worried about him missing a week or two of school. I mean his face, Matt. You heard what the doctor said. His face is going to be disfigured," Sheila argued back. "We don't even know the full extent of the damage yet, Sheila. It could be minor. It could possibly heal. And you heard what he said. Plastic surgery could be an option in time." In time? What kind of time? A year, 2 years, and what about in the meantime? People are going to see him and they're going to talk. Is that what you want? He's going to be a pariah. You think anyone is going to want to have him around their kids? Jeff was hearing all of this, just letting it soak in slowly. As his mind absorbed the words, he felt that rage return. Sick, rich, dark, that syrup of raw, primal emotion. He wanted to scream at his mother, to tell her to shut up, that he was the one lying here, half his face burned, blind in one eye, all thanks to her forcing him to go over to Randy's house. He wanted to ask her why she left, why she went off to go shopping, or have her nails done, or whatever it was that she did. He wanted to know why she'd leave him alone with a kid who just days before tried to jump him and his brother. He wanted to know how she could care more about his appearance than the fact that he was lying in the hospital. Matt Woods began to speak again. "I just can't believe he shot himself in the face with a flare gun. I always thought Jeff was more responsible than that." "Don't even get me started on that," Sheila replied. "I couldn't believe it when Randy and his friends explained to the medics and police how it all happened. Randy was just trying to show Jeff around his house and wanted to show him the collection of magazines his dad kept in the garage. You know, boys. He was probably hoping that a couple of Playboys would be in there or something. Then he said Jeff found the box containing the flare gun and just wouldn't stop playing around with it. You should have heard those other boys, Matt. They told me that they practically begged Jeff to just put it down before he got hurt, but he just had to show off. I just don't know where we went wrong, Matt. I thought us moving out here to a nice quiet neighborhood would make everyone happy. Jeff, though, he just wants to fight us on everything." And while all that came together in Jeff's mind, he continued to swim in that black ichor of hatred and rage. The morphine drip added a nice touch of euphoria. Jeff could almost see himself plunging into the syrupy waters of hatred and emerging changed. Each dip brought him so much twisted pleasure, and that was when he finally understood. He could sample the pleasure now, not because he was enjoying what was happening, but because he knew he could enjoy what was to come. Just as the doctor had predicted, Jeff was scheduled to go home a few days later. During his time at the hospital, he never asked to see his face. It wasn't until the last day that he finally asked for a mirror. The nurse had come in to change his bandages, as was the routine. She was a pleasant woman. She spoke to him, asked him how he was doing. He enjoyed her visits. So, on the final day, when she arrived to clean and dress his face, he asked to see himself. "Are you sure, sweetheart? Would you like me to call in your parents first?" she asked. "No, thank you," Jeff replied. "I think I want to see it for myself first, without them standing over me." "I understand," she replied honestly, without a hint of pretension. Once the bandages were off, she handed him a small hand mirror. "Would you like me to step out of the room?" she asked. Jeff ignored her and looked at himself, taking stock of the damage. Sure enough, his face was a mess. The entire left side, at least. The flare struck him traveling upwards and burned a scar into his left cheek that extended to his eye. At first glance, it almost looked like he was smiling on that side. The scar was still bright red, and burned tissue spread out on either side. Once it arrived at his eye, the news did not get any better. His eye was white, just a lifeless bulb plugged into his face. He closed his right eye and found that he could see nothing from his left eye at all. The scar continued up the left side of his forehead. The damage was less severe there, however. The hair on the left side of his head was burned off, leaving a few strands to stick up here and there. "Sorry, sweetie, but I have to put clean bandages on," she told him. Jeff smiled. "It's okay. There will be plenty of time for me to admire myself later." There was no joy from his parents on the ride home or upon arrival. They spoke very little, and there was a tension in the car that simply wouldn't fade out. As for Lou, he was thrilled that his brother was okay, but he didn't know what to say concerning the damage to his face. So after asking a few questions about the accident and the recovery, he fell silent as well. They walked into their home at dusk, and Lou asked about dinner. He suggested they let Jeff pick a place to celebrate his return home. "Just go to sleep, both of you boys. Go to sleep," Sheila remarked. She and her husband both retreated to their bedrooms as well, to argue or feel sorry for themselves. Who knew? Jeff and Lou didn't speak much that night. Jeff spent most of the evening staring at himself in the mirror. He kept pulling back the bandages and looking at the scars. Lou wanted to see them too, but felt that it might be imprudent to ask. "I'm glad you're home, Jeff. I really missed you, and I'm glad you're okay," Lou said to Jeff as he stared at himself. "I'm not okay, Lou, and neither are you. None of us are really. There is a sickness here. The only difference is, now my sickness shows on the outside as well," Jeff replied, his voice as flat as that on an answering machine. "What are you talking about?" Lou asked. "One day you'll see it too. This is what happens though. This is what happens when it all falls down," Jeff said, still peeking behind his bandages. "Jeff, I don't know what you're trying to say," Lou responded. Jeff didn't reply though, and after several moments, Lou left him alone. Lou went down to his parents' bedroom and knocked on the door. "What is it?" the voice of his mother asked. "Mom, I think Jeff is acting weird. You may want to come talk to him." "Go away, Lou. Leave your mother alone," his father's voice answered. Lou, being young, had no other ideas, so he returned to his own bedroom. He didn't know that those would be the last words he'd ever hear his parents speak to him. That night, Sheila and Matt Woods awoke together, both being light sleepers. It took little to bring them out of slumber. The sudden removal of their blanket, as it was snatched from the bed, did the trick just fine. They awoke to see a small light coming from the half-bath that was situated in their master bedroom. The door was cracked only slightly, and the light source was weak. They could make out a human shape, standing over their bed though. What is going on?" Sheila grumbled. As their vision came into focus, they realized their son was standing before them. Matt reached over and flipped on the lamp next to their bed. Jeff was standing there, his bandages off, his disfigured face beaming down on them, with a long kitchen knife clutched in his right hand. "What are you doing, son?" Matt asked, his mind still trying to shake out the cobwebs of sleep. "He's got a knife," Sheila screamed, grabbing at her husband's arm. Matt kept his composure though. "Sheila, it's probably the painkillers. He likely got up and got disoriented. Relax, for Christ's sake." Jeff tilted his head to one side, still not speaking. He stared hard at his father, slowly bringing the knife up, ensuring that he saw it well. "Son, what are you doing?" Matt asked. "Scaring you," Jeff replied, with no emotion in his voice. "Matt, do something," Sheila pleaded. "Okay, son, I realize you've been through a lot, but you need to go back to bed. I'm going to call the doctor in the morning and—" Jeff moved quickly across to his father's side of the bed, his head moving about, alternating between a normal-looking young man and the deformed ghoul that had been lurking in the shadows. "Okay, son, you've scared me. Is that what you wanted?" Matt asked, adjusting to the middle of the bed to put distance between himself and his son. "Good, now I can start hurting you," Jeff spoke again, with no emotion. His father had time to utter a single syllable, most likely to ask another question, to try and reason with his son. Jeff, however, gave him time to do no more than that. He lunged onto the bed, driving the knife into his father's stomach. Matt attempted to fend Jeff off, but the wound to his midsection rendered him into shock, and his arms fell to the side. Jeff could hear his mother screaming, but paid no mind. He wanted to finish with his father first. Removing the knife, Jeff stabbed down into his stomach 3 more times quickly. His father gasped and coughed up blood. His body jerked and twitched each time the knife found its mark. After the 3rd time, Matt Woods lay still. Sheila had backed up against the headboard of the bed. She wanted to climb down, make a run for it, but she'd balled herself up between the headboard and the end table. In her frantic state of terror and confusion, she couldn't figure out how to do something as simple as dismount a bed. "Jeff, why are you doing this to us?" she asked feebly. "Randy started it, you must have known that, but you ignored it. Lou had a busted lip, you must have seen that, but you ignored it. I was shot in the face with a flare gun, but you believed Randy. Why? So you could fit in?" Jeff asked in a low, almost growling voice. "No, baby, I believed you. It was just your father's job. And we're new here. And, oh God, Jeff, please," his mother begged. "Tell me about homeschool, Mom. Tell me all about how you don't want to send me out in public because of my face. Tell me how none of the other kids will want to be my friend, and how none of their parents will want to be yours. Tell me about that, Mom. Tell me how nice it's going to be. You homeschooling me?" "Jeff, please. I was just stressed. I was worried about you, that's all. Please, I love you." "Mom, I think you should take your own advice, you know, what you told Lua when we got home tonight. He wanted to do something nice to welcome me home. And do you remember what you told us to do instead?" Jeff asked, as he now crawled over, cornering his mother on the bed. "What did I say?" she asked, the question coming out barely a whisper. "Go to sleep," Jeff snarled, and drove the knife into his mother's chest. He stabbed her over and over again, and as he did, he finally found that perfect recipe, that heavenly blend. That rage, hate, and pleasure all mixed into one perfect formula, and for a while Jeff became lost in it all. Jeff opened his brother's bedroom door, not surprised to find his brother asleep. He had dozed off with headphones in, so he slept through all the shouting. That was fine with Jeff. It was easier that Lou not have to hear all of that. Jeff sat down on his brother's bed and nudged him slightly. It took a moment, but Lou finally opened his eyes and looked up. Jeff removed his earphones for him. "You're free now, Lou," he spoke softly. "Jeff, what? What are you talking about?" Lou mumbled, still half asleep. "You'll see in the morning. I just wanted to let you know I love you. You've been my best friend, remember that, okay?" "Thanks, I love you too." "Now, let me go back to sleep," Lou replied, already dozing off again. Jeff smiled and stood up. As he left the room, he looked back at his sleeping brother one last time before he vanished into the night.
That's the end of the story. Comment down your views about the story. And if you liked it, then give it a thumbs up. Also do subscribe for more content like this.